Hello friends, this is Libby from Lucky Bean Tours in New Orleans. It's starting to rain on me, but I am standing in front of the best off tomb in Metairie Cemetery. As far as impressive cemeteries goes, I think Metairie is it. We have over 40 cemeteries in New Orleans. Some are very beautiful, some are very historic, some are very poignant. But as far as large-scale tombs with sculpture and stained glass, high-end tombs, I think Metairie is the best one to explore if that's what you're looking for. But today we're going to explore cemeteries all over New Orleans. We have over 40 cemeteries, and it would be impossible to cover them on a walking tour. But on a virtual tour, we can go all over the city, and I will show you some of the highlights, plus explain what we do with our dead here in New Orleans. The original burial grounds in New Orleans were probably in the churchyard because it was sacred ground, or the levee because it was high ground. But eventually in 1722, they established an official city cemetery, and that was called the St. Peter Cemetery, and it was in the town. It was in what is now the French Quarter neighborhood. But in 1788, the city established a devastating fire, and in the process of rebuilding, they decided to move the city cemetery to the outskirts of town. And that's this cemetery right here, St. Louis Cemetery number 1, making it the oldest cemetery in the city that still exists, because that first one was just sort of built over. It's lots of original citizens of New Orleans way down under those buildings there. As you can see, St. Louis Cemetery number 1 is closed to the public, and that's been since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. But this is where our kind of unique burial customs begin. In particular, our custom of interring our dead above the ground instead of below the ground. This is the most typical type of tomb in these New Orleans cemeteries. It's a family tomb or a family vault. This one belongs to the Hellerick family, and all of the members of the family, and perhaps even more people, are all interred in this tomb. But that's the interesting question, is how do you get all those people in that tomb? And I'm going to show you on another tomb. This is another typical family tomb in a New Orleans cemetery. We're in the Valance Cemetery right now. It's kind of overgrown and weedy. But this is what it looks like without the closure tablet on. So the closure tablet has been taken off, and then behind it you can see that there's a shelf right here. So after the family builds the structure, when the first person in the family dies, they take an unembalmed body in an unfinished pine casket, and they'll put the body right here on the shelf. Second person dies, same thing, unembalmed body, unfinished pine casket, and they put them in here. Now this is in traditional times. Today, embalming is very, very commonplace. Even cremation is commonplace. But traditionally, this is what was done. And so when the third person in your family died, what do? This thing is full. You're gonna take out the one that's been in there the longest. If they've been there at least 1 year and 1 day, that's the minimum amount of time before you want to disturb the dead. You're gonna take those remains out and remove them down below into a chamber. So there's a chamber down here, which is called a receiving vault, or it's called a caveau in French. And you put the remains down there, and then you put the new person in. And then that way you can do it over and over again, year after year after year, and the same family can be all in one vault. This really large tomb is not the tomb of one humongous family. This is what we call a society tomb. So a society tomb would belong to a club or a group, like a religious organization or an immigrant group that would come together, and they would all contribute to the club, like paying your monthly dues. And then once you die, the ultimate benefit is that you get to be interred in the society tomb with all the other members. So we have these really impressive tombs. This one in particular is an Odd Fellows Rest. And sometimes they have names engraved on the closure tablets, but usually they don't. Very often they'll have numbers. So within the organization, they would have known who was interred in which vault, or the family would have known who was interred in which vault. But generally they don't inscribe names on the closure tablets. I'm in the Valance Cemetery, which is a city-owned cemetery. And this row of burial chambers right here is actually a wall of the cemetery, and these are called wall vaults. These are used for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it's less expensive than building a family tomb. So if you have a small family or not a big budget, then you might just want to buy space, and then your family can go in there one by one. You can't fit as many people in the family tomb, but you could put 6 or 8 people in here. The most names I've ever seen on a closure tablet on a wall vault was 15 names. Another reason that they could be used is if there's no room in your family tomb because the deaths have been too recent. So you can't disturb the dead until it's been at least a year and a day. And that simply ensures they've gone through one hot Louisiana summer. And so if a few people die within a couple of months of each other and you don't have space in the tomb and it's not time, you can't open it yet, then you can put one family member in one of these wall vaults, and then you just come back a year later and you take them out and you put them back in with your family. So it's just sort of like a temporary resting place. For the poor, for the very poor, there's designated vaults throughout the cemeteries in New Orleans where you could go in there, or you could purchase it in advance for a very low price, but you would be doing so with the understanding that someone that you haven't met yet is going to be in there with you eventually one day. So strangers could end up in the same wall vault. Here is a row of tombs that either have a flat top or it looks like a little garden, like in this case, sort of an overgrown garden. These are called coping tombs, and these are the ones that are seen in all the Jewish cemeteries, but then throughout the cemeteries in Christian cemeteries, Catholic cemeteries, non-denominational cemeteries. It just is a way for you to be buried in soil in New Orleans if for religious or personal reasons you don't want to go into a vault. They could put you in here. They build up a little wall, and then that way they can lower the casket into the dirt, and then they can put dirt on top of the casket. So you fulfilled that obligation or that desire to go back into the earth, but you have less of a chance of floating away if we have a big flood. I am in front of Lafayette Cemetery number 1, which is in the Garden District area of New Orleans. It is currently closed to the public, but it has been the site of lots of filming of television shows and movies and videos through the years. Originally, this neighborhood was called the City of Lafayette, which is why the cemetery is called Lafayette Cemetery. And you may have seen some movies filmed in here, like Double Jeopardy with Ashley Judd. NCIS New Orleans films here. Recently, a short television series on Showtime called Your Honor. It's a beautiful old New Orleans cemetery. I'm now outside St. Roch Cemetery. St. Roch was a German congregation that built this cemetery in the 1840s, and it is known for its Stations of the Cross and its beautiful little chapel. All of the walls of St. Roch Cemetery are wall vaults, and then built into the walls, they have these beautiful Stations of the Cross that depict Jesus's last walk to the cross. And because St. Roch is the patron saint that has anything to do with legs, feet, knees, people come out here on Good Friday and they go from one station to the next, very often on their knees. Greenwood Cemetery was established in 1852 by the Firemen's Benevolent Charitable Association. It's a big, beautiful cemetery that you will see on your way into town if you're coming in from the airport, and it covers acres and acres. It's also easy in Greenwood to see how they call these cities of the dead. They actually have street names, and you can compare these rows and rows of family tombs to houses on a street. This is Holt Cemetery, which is a city-owned cemetery for poor and indigent burials. It's pretty poignant. Let's go in and take a look. Holt Cemetery is known for a lot of homemade and hand-painted tombstones, memorials, markers. It's in pretty bad state of disrepair. Buddy Bolden is generally considered to be the first jazz player, and he was interred somewhere out here in Holt Cemetery, but no one knows particularly where. So this monument was placed here in his honor. Hurricane Ida did some damage to the Hurricane Katrina Memorial Cemetery, but I'll try to find some footage so that you can see what it looked like before this most recent storm. The Katrina Memorial Cemetery was originally the Charity Hospital Cemetery, which was established in the 1840s to bury unknown people, usually victims of epidemics, a lot of sailors that were coming in and no one knew who they were. But in 2008, it became also the Hurricane Katrina Memorial Cemetery. 1,464 people died in New Orleans as a result of Hurricane Katrina. And a little over 60 of them still remained unidentified 1 year after the storm. So the coroner of New Orleans and some other people in the funeral business decided to create a memorial to the victims of Hurricane Katrina here on Canal Street. It's a very pretty memorial. It's laid out in a sort of spiral shape, the shape of a hurricane. It's surrounded by Louisiana bald cypress trees with a peaceful memorial in the center. The Katrina Memorial was dedicated on August 29th, 2008, which was the 3-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And it had to be a quick dedication because there was a hurricane bearing down upon us. And then on the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, August 29th, 2001, Hurricane Ida damaged the entrance. I am outside the gates of Dispersed of Judah Cemetery, which is one of several beautiful Jewish cemeteries in New Orleans. Jewish burial customs say that the people have to go back into the earth once they die, and that's kind of tricky in a city like New Orleans that has such a high water table. So they've come up with a unique way of interment in the Jewish cemeteries of New Orleans, which is called coping tombs, and we'll take a closer look. In the Jewish cemeteries, each family has a coping tomb. They build a little wall and they can fill it with earth, and that way you're a little bit safer putting someone into the ground here in New Orleans. In this way, the Jewish cemeteries look more like a series of gardens rather than a row of houses. Here I am in Metairie Cemetery, which is really known for its beautiful, elaborate sculptures and rows of really impressive society tombs. Most of the society tombs in Metairie Cemetery are Italian and Sicilian society tombs. Sculptures of angels are popular in all cemeteries, but of course, they're really elaborate in Metairie Cemetery. If you look around enough, you'll find the sculpture of a bison in Metairie Cemetery. For some people, it was very fashionable to depict children mourning and bronze sculptures and Greek and Roman classic figures. Metairie Cemetery is privately owned, non-denominational, and so there are people of all different faiths out in this cemetery. The lovely Morales tomb with this beautiful bronze sculpture was originally built for and purchased by Josie Arlington, who was one of those landladies or madams from the Storyville era in New Orleans. but later it was sold by her heirs to the Morales family. This 16-foot tall Celtic cross is actually a monument to a Louisiana Confederate regiment. A Confederate captain who died in 1939 has these bronze dogs guarding his tomb. I'm back in Metairie Cemetery on that rainy day. This behind me is one of the Egyptian revival tombs in this cemetery. Most of the VIPs that are interred out in Metairie Cemetery are more locally known, but I'll show you a couple that you may have heard of even if you're not from here. This tomb with the fleur-de-lis in front of it is the tomb of Tom Benson, the owner of the Saints, who died in 2018. The angel with the trumpet is over the tomb of Louis Prima, the famous singer. And he also had inscribed on his tomb the lyrics, "When the end comes, I know they'll say just a gigolo and life goes on without me." And the man who rests in this impressive tomb is Al Copeland, the man who created Popeye's fried chicken. For something very different from your typical New Orleans cemetery, but also worth seeing if you're taking a tour of cemeteries of the area, is the National Cemetery behind me. This is the Chalmette National Cemetery. It's part of the United States Parks Service, and it was originally established during the Civil War as a burial place for American soldiers who fell here. The National Cemetery is one of the most peaceful places in this area. Under the gorgeous live oaks are the remains of over 16,000 veterans of American wars from the War of 1812 through Vietnam. Thank you for joining me on this tour of some of the beautiful cemeteries of New Orleans. Our cemeteries are one of my favorite things to show our guests because I believe that these tombs were built to be seen. That even though we may not know the details of the lives of the people that are interred in them, as long as these monuments are here, their families and their loved ones have assured that they will never be forgotten.